Welcome back. Now, the critical role of climate technology, water infrastructure, and research in development of green hydrogen industries were highlighted during the inaugural Global African Hydrogen Summit in Windhoek. The first of its kind, the summit attracted about 1,000 global leaders and industry players who deliberated on how to unlock the full potential of the green hydrogen opportunity in Africa and to harness its projected impact on achieving a sustainable and equitable energy transition globally. The theme for the summit was From Ambition to Action. Take us through what has been achieved so far for Africa to achieve its full hydrogen dream. Now joining us on the line is Green Hydrogen Commissioner James Mnyupe. A very good evening to you, James. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
A very good evening, and thank you so much for having me online. It's a real pleasure.
Well, first things first, can you give us a summary of the summit, and have you achieved the objectives of the summit?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for having me online. So, a summary of the summit is a bit of a hard task, but nonetheless, I think for me, one of the highlights of the summit was to see other African countries alongside Namibia, essentially showcasing what they're doing to essentially decarbonize their own hard to abate sectors, but also to really drive new green industrialization. So green hydrogen in itself is not a product that we're all particularly excited about on its own, but its potential to create new industries in our various countries across the continent is something that we all share a lot of passion for. But in terms of objectives for the summit, attendance was very good. We've gotten a lot of good feedback. And then, of course, as I've said, it has championed dialogues amongst Africans. There was a really great interministerial session where Africans met with Africans, and we said, look, this is an opportunity that is really global in nature. How do we collaborate to unlock those opportunities? So from that perspective, the summit was a great success.
Well, James, the theme for the summit, From Ambition to Action, could you briefly perhaps just take us through as to what has been achieved so far to achieve its full potential hydrogen dream?
Sure. So, to be honest, one would remember that the ambition was really captured from a Namibian perspective in HPP2 all the way back on the 18th of March, 2021. There, specifically on page, I think it was 36 of HPP2, our late president, together with his government, really sort of said, look, we recognize that green hydrogen could be what we called a strategic bet. We thought that, in utilizing Namibia's natural resources, we could inspire a plethora of investors from around the world to make the Namibia their home to produce this molecule. So that roughly we have achieved. We now have investors both in the Central Valley of Namibia, but also investors in the Southern Valley, in the Karas region and in the Erongo region. Similarly, I think importantly for Namibia, sometimes we always talk about government putting together really beautiful documents, but not necessarily always executing those documents to fruition. In this instance, HPP2 was crafted in 2021, but by 2024, 3 years later, we've got investors in the private sector actually building a green hydrogen project in the Erongo region. You can take High Iron as an example. They're under construction. They're looking to produce green hydrogen at the end of this year. But importantly, they're not looking to export that hydrogen. They're looking to use that hydrogen to add value to our own iron ore and export a totally new product, which is direct reduced iron, a key ingredient for producing green steel. So from that perspective, it has been a success. We've invited private sector players from around the world. Our own Namibians are building these projects. At the height of construction, High Iron had 359 Namibians working from around the country, small SMEs, all got contracts to build this project. They're looking to build a 25 megawatt solar plant, which is the second largest power plant in Namibia, and they're looking to produce Namibian produced DRI before the end of that year, before the end of 2024. So from that perspective, ma'am, it has been a success in terms of ambition, HPP2, to action, high iron as an example, actually producing products, new products for Namibia before the end of this year. So I believe that this government has actually delivered on its ambitions, at least the first level or the first phase thereof.
Well, what can you highlight as some of the most crucial points of discussion that were on the agenda?
So I would argue on the agenda, some of the conversations were, look, how do we align on certification and standards from around the world, right? All of us want to measure and create green hydrogen. How do we make sure that this green hydrogen produced in Namibia, produced in Morocco, produced in Egypt, produced in South Africa is measured as the same at the same level of certification? So that's one. Another key agenda item was, how do we finance these green hydrogen projects in such a way that the hydrogen produced is of an acceptable level of competitive price? So we were talking a lot about mobilizing concessionary capital for these green hydrogen projects. We also, of course, spoke about cross-border collaboration in matching producers in producer nations, typically from the global south, with buyers from essentially the global north, to make sure that the projects being constructed in the global south primarily had off-takers, and that would allow for bankability. These were all some of the key main points of the agenda. From a Namibian perspective, there was conversations around local content. So how do our SMEs get involved in what is a large and very interesting new industry? And then lastly, ma'am, I think a very important one was, are we making all these molecules for export, or are some of these molecules being made for local consumption? And there we showcased, for example, yes, high iron, using hydrogen to add value to our own iron ore, but importantly, imagine producing ammonia here in the Erongo region by CMB, not for export, but for utilization at home as a bunkering fuel for ship users from around the world to come here and utilize that ammonia to refuel their ships. So really the conversation was dynamic, but these were some of the key agenda items that were being discussed.
Well, perhaps another crucial question would be, is Africa ready for its green industrial revolution?
Well, Africa, whether it's ready or not, the green industrial revolution is pushing ahead. But the good news was all of our neighbors, whether it was Morocco, they had a company called OCI, and they were showcasing how OCI was utilizing a lot of the incentives that the King of Morocco himself made available to local and international investors, called the Morocco Offer. Egypt, for example, were showcasing how their own company called Fertiglobe, which was a company that brought a company from Abu Dhabi to invest in Egypt to create some green ammonia, which then won the global H2 global tender process. Fertiglobe won that particular tender, where they would supply green ammonia to the German industrial cluster at the price of $1,000 a ton for green ammonia. You know, you have to consider, ma'am, that gray ammonia would trade anywhere between 300 to 400. So for somebody to be willing to pay $1,000 for gray ammonia, that sent a strong signal to the market. And this is, of course, an African country, or at least a project based in an African country in Egypt. South Africa was talking about their plans to produce e-kerosene, for example. And of course, Namibia was talking about its plans to produce direct reduced iron before the end of the year. So all in all, if you include also Kenya looking to produce green fertilizer in the next couple of years, I would say that Africa is now fully aware of the opportunity to produce green products that would help to bypass things like the carbon border adjustment mechanism that the EU trading bloc is looking to put together to encourage the production of low carbon products. So all in all, African countries are aware, and we're all working together to make use of our strengths, to industrialize our countries, create new jobs, and essentially start making goods that can really help us combat climate change on a global level.
Well, James, the transition to green energy, of course, comes with a number of challenges. Could you take us through some of these challenges, and also what would be the best way to address these challenges?
Of course, I mean, the challenges are vast and they could be as basic as, wow, this is a new industry. It's very hard to understand. I just reject it because I don't understand it. All the way to engineering and scientific complexities like, look, renewable energy, sun and solar energy and wind energy are intermittent in nature. So how do I now use an intermittent energy source? You know, it's on when it's sunny, but it's not on when it's cloudy or at night. How do I use such an unpredictable energy source to build a new industry? And there are various solutions to that particular problem. You could use batteries to solve the intermittency, all the way to you could use hydroelectricity to balance the intermittent nature of wind and solar. Namibia is blessed with both. If you think about it, the government is saying we need to invest in Bain's hydroelectricity generation plant with Angola, all the way to we also have sun and wind. So the two of them might be able to balance themselves out, especially if you also introduce battery. But another solution that even our sort of government is asking us to look into is small modular reactors. Is nuclear energy potentially maybe affordable one day in such a manner that it could couple, or at least it could reduce the intermittent nature of the renewable energy? Could we use small modular reactors to potentially provide some firm power in order to deal with the intermittency of renewable energy? So the solutions are many, and we are researching all of these solutions on behalf on behalf of the Namibian government. But at the moment, renewable energy from solar and wind are some of the cheapest sources of energy that we have. And our investors from around the world seem to prefer those sources of energies to start building green industries in Namibia, not in 10 years' time, but really today. And not even 5 years from now. They're looking to deploy this renewable energy today. I think one last challenge that is important to mention is the transmission lines that we will have to build. We have a very big country. So if you produce a lot of renewable energy in one part of the country, but the consumption of that renewable energy is in another part of the country, you need to build a strong grid in between those two places and make sure that you're balancing the grid across such a vast country, 824,000 square kilometers. So these are all some of the challenges that we're trying to solve from an engineering and, of course, a financial perspective as well.
Well, with the focus that the summit had on Namibia's immense potential in the space of hydrogen, could you briefly explain to us what that potential is and what has been achieved so far?
Sure. So in a nutshell, Namibia has a very, very good, one of the best in the world, solar resource, basically being able to generate electricity from sun energy, and also a very good wind resource, being able to generate electricity from wind. And the way they work is in Namibia, of course, the sun will shine during the day, but a lot of our good wind resource is during the evening. So you can see the two are quite complementary, meaning that you can have a stable source of electricity sometimes from the morning all the way to the evening.
Right.
And that gives us an advantage to make sure that the machine that produces this hydrogen can work throughout the day for a long period of time. That means that the hydrogen that can be produced in Namibia can be low cost and competitive. Now, the hydrogen molecule is merely an ingredient. You can use it to make many different products. So the molecule itself is not the key product we will export. We're looking to export that molecule used to purify iron ore, That molecule used to make ammonia, which can be a shipping fuel. That molecule used to make ammonia, which can be used as a fertilizer in ammonium sulfate, and so on. So you must think of that a hydrogen molecule almost as an ingredient like flour or sugar, and you can then use it to make donuts or cakes or pancakes, right? But the sugar is the key ingredients in all those three different products. So that's a rough way to think about why we are competitive in making this hydrogen molecule. Now, once we start making that molecule, what have we done in Namibia? We've really managed to attract investors from around the world, whether it's investors from the United States, investors from the EU, the European Union, investors from China, or investors from Japan. All of them have recognized that Namibia is an attractive jurisdiction. It's safe, it's peaceful, it's strategically located in terms of our port, and of course, it has this solar and wind advantage. So for now, we've been able to mobilize almost 90 million euros. So that's almost, 1.8 billion Namibian dollars in grants that we are using to study some of this potential. We've also been able to mobilize some pilot projects that are now building these projects in Namibia, Dowres, High Iron, Clean Energy. These are all pilot projects that have hired from 300 people all the way to almost 400 people during construction here in Namibia. So we've created some jobs. We've started producing some hydrogen. We've started producing some direct reduced iron. And then we've also managed to attract larger investors that want to build much larger projects. And at the Hydrogen Summit, one of them, which is a project that has Chinese investors, but also investors from Europe, have come together. And that's very important. Chinese investors, European investors have come together to try and build one of the larger projects around the world in Namibia, here in the Erongo region. And they want to start producing 500,000 tons of ammonia, and they want to start construction in 2026. So that is very exciting. Their name is Zero, and their project was announced at the Global African Hydrogen Summit. One last thing we have achieved is that we've attracted Belgium's largest shipping company. They have chosen Namibia as their African hub of operations. And next year, if all goes well, they would like to start building an ammonia bunkering terminal, essentially a big tank where they can store ammonia, and they can start coming here with their 20 ships to start using that ammonia to refuel their ships. That's a totally new industry that didn't exist in Namibia in 2021 when we started. So, ma'am, these are some of the achievements that we've been able to unlock since 2021. But of course, there's a lot more work that we have to do, but it certainly creates a very promising future for Namibia in this particular space.
Well, James, perhaps just to round up our discussion, has the creation of jobs started already, and who stands a chance to get an opportunity to get a job in this kind of rather in this industry now?
Absolutely. So, this industry is very labor intensive, right? So, if you think of a place like High Iron, we just visited there today. I'm actually at the coast. I'm dialing in from Swakopmund. Earlier this morning, we went to High Iron. It's right behind the Valencia Mountains where we used to mine uranium. And there they've created a plethora of jobs. At the peak of their construction, they had 359 employees. And as they transition to the next phase, they will hire up to 800 employees. So at this site, they built 25 megawatts of solar panels just to start. What does that entail? That entails digging holes in the ground, pouring cement, putting a metal truss, and then loading solar panels. Namibians know how to do all of those jobs. It also involves moving, yellow metal graders to dig holes. Namibians know how to do that. It involved coordinating the solar panels into a power system and installing transformers that will take direct current into alternate current. Namibians were doing all of that. Then it involves taking this electricity to a house where all the electrolyzers are there, and then pumping water through those electrolyzers to transform the water into hydrogen. Namibians have now learned how to do that. So if you just think of high iron, the whole process of building up the solar plant, producing the hydrogen, we have now learned how to do all of that as Namibians, and we are looking to do more. If you go to Cleanergy, similar thing. Not only are they making hydrogen, they're also converting hydrogen, or at least diesel trucks, into dual fuel. Dual fuel means it now uses hydrogen and diesel.
Thank
And
you.
converting the injectors that were producing diesel, firing that to then fire the truck engine. Now you're also firing hydrogen. At Cleanergy, they have taught Namibians how to convert these trucks from using diesel to now using diesel and hydrogen.
Thank
We
you,
went
James.
to the site today, and now Namibians know how to do that as well. So the jobs are there for all of us to have.
Thank you so much, James, for speaking to us this evening and highlighting to us some of those achievements, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for having me on your show. We'll chat again soon.
All right. Bye-bye. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was the Green Hydrogen Commissioner James Mnyupe speaking on the conclusion of the Global African Hydrogen Summit that was recently held in Windhoek. Coming up next,